Properties in Obsidian are insanely powerful, but the sad truth is that most Obsidian users are only scratching the surface of what their notes can actually do because they don't really know what to do with that note metadata that's at the top of their notes. So in this video, I'm gonna walk you through every single property type available in Obsidian. I'm gonna explain exactly how each one works and show you where to use each type to get the most out of your notes and ideas. And by the time we're done, you'll have a clear roadmap for implementing the different property types that will have the biggest impact on your own personal knowledge management system. So this video is a continuation of my Obsidian for Beginners series, and so far we've covered all of the core plugins, all of the Obsidian settings, a list of recommended starter plugins, and a guide to writing in Markdown. Today, we're gonna help you master the use of these properties in your Obsidian notes, and the place to start here is by considering, what are properties anyway? Simply put, properties are structured metadata that are attached to your notes. Usually, this metadata is stored as plain text in the Markdown file itself, and it's visible at the top of your note in Obsidian. Now, these properties are very flexible, and they can help you organize, sort, filter, and query your information in some pretty powerful ways. If you've ever used Notion, you're probably already familiar with properties, as that's how you sort information in your Notion database. Using properties, you can do things like show everything that meets a certain criteria, is assigned to a specific person, or is due on a specific day. Well, in Obsidian, properties work exactly the same way as they do in Notion, but the whole thing sits on top of plain text files, so if you ever want to move your notes to a different system or app in the future, you can. Now, before we get started, you're gonna wanna go to the settings, go to core plugins, and make sure that the properties view option is toggled on. You actually don't need this on in order to start using properties themselves in Obsidian, but this will allow you to see the properties for the file in your right sidebar if you want, as well as view the list of all properties in your vault. So once you do this, you're ready to start adding properties to your Obsidian notes. Now, to add properties to your notes in Obsidian, you simply type 3 dashes at the top of your Obsidian note. This will create a properties section at the top of the note, and you can create a property by simply typing the name for the property that you want to create. Now, if this does not work for you, make sure that your settings are configured correctly by going to Settings, Editor, and scroll to the Display section and make sure that Properties in Document is set to Visible. Now, there are other options here. There's Hidden, which hides the properties from the note, and Source, which shows the raw YAML format. I think Visible looks the best, though if you have a lot of properties, you may want to select Hidden if you find them distracting. You can still view and edit properties for a note even if you have them hidden by opening the command palette with Command P on Mac or Control P on Windows and selecting the Properties View Show File Properties option. This will open the file properties in your right sidebar, and you can interact with the properties just like you could if they were inserted at the top of your note. For the sake of this tutorial though, let's just leave this set to visible for now. It's gonna make things a lot simpler. Now, just like when you create notes, you can use autocomplete when creating properties. So any properties that you've previously used will show up, and you'll be able to select them from a drop-down list. This is handy because it's gonna help you make sure you don't accidentally create multiple similar properties. You can also add properties by invoking the command palette with Command P on Mac or Control P on Windows and selecting the Add File Property command, or by using the keyboard shortcut Command semicolon or Control semicolon respectively. Now, once you add a property, you'll see that it has 2 parts. One for the property name or the key, and one for the property value. So together, these make up what is known as a key value pair. Now, that's not critical to know right now, but you may come across that term in the future, so this is where it comes from. You can also use the keyboard to edit either the key or the value, and if you right-click on the icon to the left of the key, you can choose the type of property that you want to use here. Now, the cool thing about properties is that while they appear as this nice, clean user interface at the top of your notes by default, they're actually stored as plain text behind the scenes. In fact, here's what it looks like in source mode. So this means your notes are still portable, and they can be read by other tools if you ever need to migrate. So the formatting of this front matter is actually the same YAML formatted metadata that Obsidian has been supporting from the very beginning, even though properties are fairly new. All right, so now that you know what properties are and how to add them, let's take a look at the different types of properties that are in Obsidian. There are 6 different types of properties: text, list, number, checkbox, date and time. So let's break these down individually, and I'm gonna cover what each property is, how it works, and I'm gonna give you some examples for when you may want to use it. So let's start with the simplest property type, which is text. This is the default property type, and it's really flexible. Text properties do exactly what they say on the tin. They contain a single line of text. So to create a text property, you just type the text that you want, and the whole string will be considered the value for the property. One way that I like to use text properties is for the status property that I assign to all my creative projects. So for example, here's the template that I use when creating a new newsletter, and as I work on the newsletter, I'll update this text property from backlog to in progress to published. I also use the text property in the metadata for my book notes, where I assign a rating for the book from 1 to 5 stars. The cool thing about these text properties is that they allow you to autocomplete any value that you've previously used. So because I have all 5-star ratings in my vault that I've used previously, I can just select the number of stars from a drop-down list. You can also use links in text properties, though you can't actually use markdown formatting, which is a bit of a bummer. If you want to use an external link, you can just paste the link in the text field and Obsidian will automatically make it clickable. So for example, when I'm working on my YouTube scripts like this, I have a Notion property where I paste the URL of the page in Notion where my editor and I go back and forth on the thumbnail and title ideas. If you want to add an internal link in this field, you can do that as well with double brackets like you can in the body of a note, but when it's saved, Obsidian will actually add quotes around that link, so just be aware of that. The next property type is list. So list properties are just like text properties, but they can contain multiple values. So to add values to a list, you simply hit enter after the text that you've entered. This creates a value with whatever text you've typed, and it adds an X character near the end that you can use to remove that value if you don't want it anymore. In source mode, each value in a list property appears on its own line, preceded by a dash and then a space. The only difference here is that unlike text properties, you cannot use URLs for a list property, but you can still use internal links as long as they are surrounded by those quote marks. So here's an example from the authors property that I add to the top of my book notes, which is actually a list property because occasionally the books that I read have more than one author. And as you can see, when you view the note in source mode, Obsidian adds those quotes around the links to the author pages that I have in my vault. The next property type is number, and this is very similar to the text property type, except that the only thing you can enter in the value for this property type is a literal number. You can use integers and decimals, but no expressions and no operators. So I use these for the number values of the daily question scores that I log as part of my daily journaling routine. If you want to see that in action, check out this other video here. But for now, here are the properties in my daily note. As you can see, if I press a keyboard key that isn't a number, the value does not register as the value for that property. The next property type is checkbox, and these properties either have a true or false value, and in live preview or reading mode, they show as checkboxes that you can toggle on or off. A false value displays an unchecked box, and a true value shows a checked box. If you check a box while in live preview or reading mode, the value gets updated from false to true. If you don't have either a true or false value, then the checkbox will show a dash indicating that there is no value set. So I use these for tracking habits on my daily note, which is a little bit different than the way that I used to do it, and I'm actually planning on a new habit tracking video to show you exactly what's changed. But for now, just know that these boxes are how I log the completion of my habits, which then get displayed on my habit tracking dashboard, as these are perfect for tracking whether something is done or not. The next property type is date, and these properties show the date according to the date format set in your system settings. So on macOS, you can find this by going to System Preferences, Language and Region, Date Format. And as you can see here, I have mine set to something different than the year-month-day formatting that is the default in Obsidian. But if you have a Daily Notes Core plugin active, the date you set for this property will still take you straight to that day's daily note, even if it doesn't match the format that you set in your daily notes settings. So here's what it looks like in source mode, and as you can see, you actually do not need to put the date in the double brackets to create a link to that day's daily note like you used to in the past. I use this property type for due dates on all my creative projects, and I have this added to my newsletter, article, and video script template files so that I can visualize the published dates on my content calendar base view. Now, if you want to see how I set that up, check out this video here. But the bottom line is that the date properties are a great way to connect something to a specific date. Now, the last property type is similar, and that is date and time. So this is just like the date property, but it also adds a specific time to the property value. So this property is handy when you want to add a date timestamp to something, but most of the time I find myself defaulting to just the date property instead. The one exception to this is a project that I'm still experimenting with where I have a metabind button in my project file that will update this reviewed property using the date and time of the moment that I click the button. I'm building out a projects dashboard for LifeHQ that will show all the projects that need to be reviewed by listing them if they have a review property that is more than 1 week ago and the project is active. This is still quite experimental, but I will make sure to make a video about this once I got it dialed in. For now though, just know this property type can be handy if you need to know exactly when something happened, and here's what it looks like when you're in source mode. As you can see, the date part is the same, but it's also followed by a T and the exact time. There are also 3 different default properties that are baked into every single Obsidian note. So the first default property that we're going to look at here is tags, which functions just like the list property type. Now you're probably already familiar with the concept of tags, which are used to apply labels to things in order to organize them. So this default property lets you add note level tags to your notes in Obsidian. Now tags are a useful way to group things together by topic, which are actually enabled by default, though you will not be able to work with them very easily until you turn on the Tags View core plugin, which will give you a list of all the tags in your vault in the right sidebar. Now, one way that I use tags is for the place that my articles actually get published. So for example, I write an article every month for the Screencast Online newsletter, so the articles that I write for all of those newsletters get an SCO tag. And this makes it easy to tell which articles I wrote for that newsletter and which ones appear on my own website so that I don't confuse these two. The next default property type is aliases, and these are additional names that you can use to reference the note when you're creating links. So for example, to link to a note in Obsidian, you have to use the note title between 2 square brackets. But if that note title doesn't really fit, you may want to create an alias for that note that you could use to link there instead. So these can be useful for simply shortening a title or for things like abbreviations or nicknames. Whatever aliases that you have listed for a note will be accessible when linking, including when finding unlinked mentions of a note. Now personally, I never use these, so I don't have a great use case for this one, unfortunately. But one example I can show you is this map note that I created a while back on the topic of habits, which has a longer title, so I know it's a map where I pulled together my thoughts on this particular topic. But I would never want to use that whole title in a sentence when I'm linking. So adding an alias like habits makes the unlinked mentions section of this note a lot more useful when I'm looking for the places where I may want to make one of those intentional connections to this note. The last default property is CSS Classes. Now, if you have added CSS snippets to your vault and you have them activated in the appearance settings, setting a CSS class can tell Obsidian which code to apply when rendering a note. So to add a CSS snippet, you have to go to Settings, Appearance, CSS Snippets, then open the Snippets folder. Put your CSS files in the folder, then go back to Obsidian, reload the snippets, and toggle the one that you want to use. If you have set the class in the CSS snippet, you can then activate it by typing the class name in the CSS Classes property. I use these in my Bible chapter notes to make them more readable, which modifies certain links for the lexicon files that I use and also the verse headings. Now note that all of these default properties are plural: tags, aliases, and CSS classes. And that's important as the singular version of these, tag, alias, and CSS class, have all been deprecated. So if you try to use the singular version of these default properties, it's not going to work. There are also a few properties that you can use in conjunction with the Obsidian Publish service when publishing your notes to the web, but we're not gonna worry about those for right now. The important thing to understand right here is the different property types that we've covered so far and how you might want to use them. Now, while there isn't a single right way to use Obsidian properties, there are some rules and best practices that we should go over before we wrap up. So let's start with the rules. When it comes to using properties, there are 3 rules that you should keep in mind. The first rule is to be consistent. If you're going to use a property for something, make sure that you use it the same way every time. If you don't, your property searches are not going to be useful because they won't show you everything that you're looking for. The second rule is be specific. Because property values auto-suggest from every value that you've entered for a key in your vault, you may want to use different versions of a property for different workflows. So for example, if I had a different writing workflow for video scripts than I did for my newsletters, I would actually break the status property into separate properties like newsletter_status and video_status. And that way, when I go to add the value, the autocomplete is only showing me relevant statuses to choose from. The third rule is to use properties sparingly. It's easy to overdo it with properties. Just like with tags and backlinks, less is often more. Not every note needs a property, but every note that has a property should help your workflows in some specific way. Okay, so now let's cover some recommended best practices to help keep your properties from becoming a giant mess inside of your vault. So first, default to singular property names whenever you can. This will help keep you from making duplicate properties. For example, rating and ratings would actually be two separate properties and could make it tricky to find what you're looking for in the future. Now, the one exception to this is that when you're using a list property, which allows multiple values, always use a plural state for the property name. All of the default property types in Obsidian actually allow multiple entries. So by using a plural in the property name in that instance, you can use it as a clue that you can actually add multiple values here. Second, don't use spaces when naming your properties. You can technically do this, but it's not a good idea when tagging, and for consistency's sake, I recommend that you carry this over to your use of properties as well. So technically, like tags, Obsidian will combine both the lowercase and the uppercase versions of a property. So capital B book and lowercase b book are treated the same. But not every text editor is going to do that. So it's worth making sure that your property metadata labels are consistent in case you ever do decide to move to some other app in the future. And finally, just like with the values, utilize autocomplete when you're adding your properties. This will make sure that you don't spell something wrong and accidentally create a duplicate property in your vault. Now, by the way, if you do make a mistake or you just want to rename a property in the future, you can actually edit these. Just make sure you have the All Properties view active by running the Properties view Show All Properties command from the command palette. Then go to the All Properties view in your right sidebar, right-click on the property you want, and then select Rename. You can then type the new property name that you want to use and hit Enter, which will update the property throughout your entire vault. Now, if only you could do this with tags as well. Kind of boggles my mind that you have to install the Tag Wrangler plugin in order to do this exact same thing with the tags in your vault, but it is what it is. Now, the very best tip that I can give you when it comes to using properties in Obsidian is to add them to your template files. This basically makes sure that all of the best practices are followed at once, and when you create new files in those templates, you're guaranteed that the right properties will be added to the note and all the properties will be formatted correctly. I use the folder templates in the Templater plugin settings for this, but you can also apply a template to a note and Obsidian will make sure that all the properties get added as well as merge any properties that already exist in your note with properties that are in that template file. All right, so that'll do it for this video on Obsidian properties. We've covered all 6 property types, the different view options for properties, the 3 special default property types, lots of examples and best practices to help you keep your properties neat and tidy. All of the template examples that I shared in this video are actually included in my free personal PKM Obsidian Starter Vault, which also includes a bunch of tips and resources to help you get more out of your notes and ideas in Obsidian. You can download that Starter Vault for free right now by going to vault.practicalpkm.com. I also mentioned LifeHQ, which is my epic done-for-you Obsidian Vault that has all the plugins pre-installed and all the settings pre-configured for all my values-based productivity and creativity workflows. This is a great starting point for some battle-tested PKM workflows if you're just starting out, or a great way to give your vault an instant upgrade. You can find out more about LifeHQ by going to lifehq.practicalpkm.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in another video.